was the eldest daughter of the Prophet Muhammad and his wife Khadijah. Hers is a story of love, sacrifice, and patience. After her father received the call to prophethood, her husband's family became oppressive, and she found herself forced to choose between the love of her life and Allah. Join Sunnahfollowers, lailanasheeba, as she unfolds the heartbreaking tale of Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Alhamdulillah, wa salat wa salam ala wa rasulullah. Welcome to our series on the heroines of Islam. The heroines of Islam, and this is the series wherein I, lailanasheeba, go over different stories of the female companions, different stories of the female companions. And alhamdulillah, when I'm doing their life story, what makes my presentation of these companions different than what other people may do when they teach, I try to give you not only an excerpt into their life so you can see what type of people they were, but also they are our role models in life. Remember, we talked about yesterday in our Aqidah class, what are the Salaf? Who are the Salaf? The Salaf, they were the first 3 generation of Muslims. They are the ones that the Prophet that Allah speaks about in the Quran. Allah says that they are the best of this nation. Allah is pleased with them as they are pleased with him. They will be of those 70,000 people that will stand before Allah on a day of judgment and not be held accountable. Why? Because of their strong faith and their sacrifice. They are our role models. Nobody understood this religion better than those companions, especially those immediate companions, the original ones who are the ones that were with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the beginning. They are the ones that migrated, as Allah said, from Mecca to Medina. They are the best of this nation. And these are the companions, the females of them, that I am going over their life stories with you. And the reason why this class is important, and the reason why this class is gaining so much attention, and I'm kind of amazed because it's not just women that are listening, but also that we have a nice male audience too. And I get a lot of positive emails from the brothers telling me how they've never known this information before, how their perspective on women has changed, because we're living in the days of fitan, the days in which Islam has become strange and watered down. The days in which we are regressing, going back to the way it was before Islam, as my cousin Mukhtar spoke about in his class an hour earlier. The laws were already stipulated by Allah and carried out by the companions. They are our mentors. They are our guide. Muslims today seem to be so confused about their religion. And I don't understand why, because I am not confused, because I know about those companions. Subhanallah. I know my religion. I know the lawful. I know the unlawful. So we have to take the time to learn this religion correctly, guys, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about our way of life. There's a lot of misconceptions about women in Islam. Islam came and gave women rights that we never had before. Women were raised up from out of the dirt and made equal to men spiritually. A woman has just as strong a chance at paradise as a man does. Okay? We're equal spiritually. We have different duties, different roles, but we're equal. And Allah did not oppress us. He took the women up out of oppression, as you can see from the story of these women of Islam. All the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wives were women of nobility, were women of beauty. They were women of courage. They were women of integrity. And they did not take a back seat. They were not at home making babies and being hidden. They were out on the battlefields with the men, fighting, paving the way for us. They were active in all discussions. They were active in all peace treaties. So this misconception that Muslims have today about women is horrific. And that's why when they come upon a woman like myself, they're shocked. Yeah, well, wake up. It's a lot like me, especially in the Muslim countries. All right, the Arabic countries. Arabic women were never repressed. They were never made to be invisible, which I hope you all see this. They were a warrior race of women, just like the Vikings, just like the Persian women, just like the Roman women. They were a warrior race. They were not inhibited. They were not hidden. Okay? And I hope you guys see that. Well, today we're going to embark upon the journey of another famous female heroine. Last week we talked about the youngest daughter of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, named Fatima. Fatima was not inhibited. Fatima was not invisible. When she walked out in the public, her presence was known. When the unbelievers abused her father and hurled feces and dung upon him, she was the one that removed it and then lashed out at the men who did it. Okay? She was present during the Hajj when her father made the Umrah. When her father sent down, when Allah sent down the verses of sacrifice, she was present on that Hajj. So again, guys, we went over her story. Her story was a story of a devoted daughter whose life was cut to a tragic beginning with the death of her mother. And at the age of 10 years old, she accompanied her father as he went out to give dawah in the streets of Mecca. And she was visible and was the one trying to fill the shoes of her mother by protecting her father. Well, now today we're going to do the story of her oldest sister. Her oldest sister named Zainab. And her story is a little bit different. Her story serves as a lesson for all women of the virtues of patience. Her story is a story of sacrifice. Her story is a story of choice. What is the one thing that we women succumb to? Love. We women have dreams of happily ever after. We women have dreams of Cinderella. Well, her story shows that, dreams are just dreams. As Muslims, Allah lets us know that we were created to worship him, and that this world is a test for us. Allah is going to test us with everything that we hold dear, our husbands, our children, our families. Well, Zainab, radiallahu anha, her life was a test from beginning to end, a test of love, a test of sacrifice, a test of faith. So let's get started on her story. And let me put the PowerPoint up on the screen. And as always, guys, all of the information that I'm giving you is authentic. It's taken from the Hadith books. You can find everything in Bukhari, Muslim, Muwatta. They're all authentic. Okay, so let's put the PowerPoint up so everyone can see and learn the story of the oldest daughter of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and her journey and her struggle of love. Okay. And again, her name was Zainab. Zainab bint, which means daughter of. One of the new sisters here, the new shahadas, asked me, what is the meaning of bint? Why do we see the name bint in a lot of stuff? Bint is the Arabic word for daughter of. And that's the way we name our children in Islam. You know, you keep the name of your father. Okay, well, Zainab was the daughter of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She's his oldest daughter. And let's talk about her. She was the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his beautiful wife Khadijah. And we talked about how back in the medieval period, women and men were married young. This was the norm in all societies for all people. A girl and a boy would be promised in marriage at birth. And then once the boy and the girl reached the age of puberty, the parents would go to them and tell them, you have been promised in marriage to so-and-so. And if the children agreed in Islam, then they would go ahead with their marriage. Well, before Islam, Zainab was married to her cousin, and his name was Abul As ibn Rabi. And he was her first cousin. This was very normal back then. Back in the medieval periods, people would marry their first cousin. This is normal. Her husband was the son of her mother Khadijah's sister Hala. Okay, so she married her first cousin. And they loved one another. They had a very special relationship with each other. The joy between these two families increased when she had two babies. She gave birth to a boy named Ali and a girl named Umayma. And this was Khadijah, radiallahu anha's favorite sister, Hala. Hala's the one that we read about in hadiths. Whenever the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would receive something, he would give it to her as a gift. She was the one who came to visit the Prophet and knocked at the door. And when he heard her voice, she sounds so much like Khadijah that she reminded the Prophet of his first wife, and he wept, and Aisha became jealous. Well, she was Khadijah's favorite sister, and her son married Khadijah's oldest daughter, Zainab. Okay, it was a good marriage. and Zainab's life passed smoothly until her father received the call to prophethood. That's when all the trials began. When her father, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, received the call to prophethood, her struggles began, and not just her struggle, but the struggles of her sisters too. Okay? Because the Quraysh did not want to accept him as a messenger of Allah. They did not want to accept her father calling the people to a new way of life. But when Zainab, radiallahu anha, heard that her father was a prophet, she immediately declared her belief in him and her dedication to the faith. So we talked about how when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the call to prophethood, he thought he was going crazy and all of that. It was his wife Khadija radiallahu anha who calmed him down and let him know that he was not crazy. And Khadija was the first person to embrace Islam. And her cousin Waraka. Well, guess what? When Zainab heard that her father was called to this new faith, she immediately embraced his way of life too. Okay? So she became Muslim immediately after hearing that her father was a prophet with a new way of life. But even though she embraced Islam, and I want all you sisters out there, we have a big problem here with the Ummah today in America. There's a lot of Muslim women who convert to Islam and their husbands are kafir. And even though you know that it's haram for you to be with a kafir man, I got some people here who've been living with their kafir husbands and still call them their husbands, having sex, rocking the boots, knocking the boots, however they say, wasn't me. It wasn't me. Well, they in there with them, and it's been 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Well, I want y'all to learn from Zainab. So Zainab converted to Islam. She became Muslim as soon as she heard that her father was a prophet. But she was worried as to whether or not her husband, would abandon the beliefs of his people and embrace the new way of life. She went home and she told her husband that her father had the great honor of being called by Allah. And he sat there and listened to her. And after she finished speaking, she asked him, "What do you think? Would you embark upon this new way of life?" But she was surprised because he didn't give her an answer. So she continued to ask him, "What do you think? What do you think?" Finally, he told her it's not suitable for him to believe in this new religion. And then he got up and he left the house in silence. Despite Zainab's great love for her husband, she did not hesitate to hold fast to her new faith, even if he insisted on turning his back to it. So this was her first test as a Muslim. The first test that she had was, what is she going to do? Here, this man, the love of her life, has told her that he didn't think it suitable for him to abandon the ways of the forefathers. to follow her father. So that was her first test. Well, am I going to choose my father over my husband, or my husband's way over my father's way? Well, she chose the way of her father. She chose Islam. So as her father continued to call others to this new way of life, some of the Quraysh accepted it, but the majority of them rejected it. And the more people that came to Islam, the more hostile the other Quraysh people became. One day, the Quraysh and their leaders decided to have a meeting to discuss the problem of the Prophet Muhammad. They had tried all means of fighting him and his religion, but nothing seemed to work. So the leaders came up with an idea. They said, okay, why don't we do this? Since Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has all this time on his hands, why don't we get his daughters' husbands to divorce them? So that way he's going to have to concentrate on taking care of all those daughters that he has. So that's the idea that the leaders of the Quraysh came up with. Now, the Prophet Muhammad had two other daughters, Ruqayya and Kulthum. They were married to their first cousins too. They were married to the sons of Abu Lahab. And you guys know Abu Lahab was an enemy of Allah. And his wife, Jamil, was somebody that Khadijah never liked anyway. Okay, so Ruqayya and Kulthum were married to the sons of Abu Lahab, and Abu Lahab was one of the leaders of the Quraysh. And Zainab was married to Abu al-As, who was the son of Umayyah, who was of Arabi, who was another one of the leaders of the Quraysh. So what these people did was they went to those leaders and told them, have your sons divorce Muhammad's daughters. That'll make him stop this new way of life of his. But when they approached Abu Lahab, he was quiet about it, because he knew that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, number one, was his nephew. Number two, he was a good man. And he knew that his sons had married two good women by marrying the Prophet Muhammad's daughters. And the men that approached Abu Lahab knew what was going through his mind. So they left him and went to his wife, Jamil, who was known for her wickedness. And they convinced her to get into the head of her husband, Abu Lahab, and get him to have his sons divorce their wives. And this is how the Arabic women were. Like I told you, they were not invisible women. They were not women that licked the pus off of men. They were warriors. The same way that Khadijah, radiallahu anha, they would, if the woman came from a family of nobility, she would wield her status. The same way Khadijah wielded her status and would say, I am the daughter of Khuwaylid, who was one of the best leaders of the Quraysh, who was a hero amongst them. She would wield her status to get what she want. That's the same way Jamil was. And also the Arabic women, they knew how to milk their husbands too. Like I said, you brothers want to take women to this oppressive state. The Arabic women didn't come from that. It's not in the Arabic women's blood to be oppressed. That's why when you go to the Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, you go to the Emirates, you go to Kuwait, you go to Bahrain, you even go to Egypt, you go to Algeria. Arabic women know how to work their husbands, and their husbands honor them. Their husbands honor them. It's not like how you Western women are treated by your husbands. The Arabic men are not treating their wives that way. And the Arabic women know how to get their husbands to do what they want them to do. Well, the Quraysh went to Jamil, who was the wife of Abu Lahab, when they saw that he was undecided as to what to do. And they told her, do what you got to do to get him to convince your sons to divorce Muhammad's daughters. And as soon as they talked to Jamil, she went to her husband and she began to verbally attack him. And she attacked him for delaying in carrying out the plan. And when she began to attack him verbally, he immediately submitted to her, which is how Arabic men do when they got an Arabic wife. Let me let you Western women know. If they were married to an Arabic wife, they'd submit, because Arabic women will not be censored. Arabic women are loud. Arabic women do not shut up. They do not let down. They get their way. So those brothers trying to tell you sisters in the West to be invisible, to never speak, they wouldn't talk that way if they had an Arabic wife. Arabic women don't stop. Hello. Hi. Okay. That's why they come to the West. Why do you think they don't have an Arabic wife from those beautiful, those countries they come from? Arabic women are beautiful. The Arabic women wouldn't marry him because they saw the weakness in him that you fell for. Okay. All right. So, but anyway, Jamil, she convinced him, to do what they wanted him to do. So that's when Abu Lahab, she went to him and she said, and she called her sons. She said, listen to what the elders of the tribe tell you to do. And they said, okay, Mom, we hear and we obey. And that's another thing too. The woman is listened to. The woman is obeyed. The mother is obeyed. That's their culture. This disrespect that we see a lot of men doing today towards women, this ain't from their culture. So as Jamil was domineering her sons, she told them that they were to divorce the Prophet Muhammad's daughters and choose other women from amongst the Quraysh. She told them this command is non-negotiable. And so then her two sons, they both went back to their wives and they told them, you are divorced. Go back to your father's house. That's how they did. That's how the Arabs did. When they divorced you, they would send the woman back to the home of her father. And this was very degrading. So they went home. They told their wives, pack your stuff, go back home to your father. That's very humiliating and very degrading. Okay. And the Quraysh were happy to have succeeded in that plan. And so after they had got Jamil and Abu Lahab to get their two sons to divorce the other two daughters of the Prophet, they then went to Abu al-As to try to persuade him to divorce Zainab. They told him, divorce her. And then you can choose whichever woman from the tribe you want to marry. But this man was different. he really, really loved his wife. He wasn't quick to divorce her like Abu Lahab's sons were. He looked at these men and he told them, no, I will never leave my wife. And I don't want no other woman but her. So the Quraysh left disappointed because they could not persuade him. And the thing was, even though Abul As did not want to follow the new religion, he loved his wife Zainab. And he felt there was no way he could ever, be rid of her. And so that's when all the struggles began. The Quraysh began to come down on the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his followers. And even though Zainab was still with her husband, this is before Allah, by the way. This is in the beginning of Islam. Allah had not sent down the laws saying that a woman could not be with a non-Muslim man yet, but it's getting ready to come. This is the beginning of Islam, okay? Just like in the beginning of Islam, Allah didn't send down the laws making alcohol illegal yet either. Everything was sent down in stages. So in the beginning, Zainab was still living with her husband. She was Muslim and he was not. And because she was Muslim, she was subjected to the same abuse that the other Quraysh were that converted to Islam. But the difference was that her husband protected her. He would protect her when the people would hurl insults at her. Okay? Then came the decisive day when the Quraysh tried to murder her father, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After the Quraysh had tried to murder her father, that's when Allah sent the command to him, telling him to migrate. And he did. That's when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam left Mecca and went to Medina. But when he migrated, Zainab was still in Mecca with her husband. Khadijah had died. She had lost her mother. And now her father had migrated to Medina. And her other sisters, had migrated to Abyssinia. So Zainab was still in Mecca with her husband, because again, Allah did not send the verses down yet saying that women could not be married to a non-Muslim, but it's getting ready to happen. Okay, but so the Prophet migrated to Medina, and Zainab, who was still married to her husband, who was not Muslim, remained in Mecca, but she was very lonely. And her husband protected her. He protected her from the abuse of the Quraysh. And so even though it was hard for her to be in Mecca alone, the news of the great victories that occurred in Medina helped her to feel better. She heard about how her father and the other Muslims were able to build a life there in Medina, free from the persecution. And this made her feel good knowing that her father was okay, because she knew and witnessed the abuse that he went through in Mecca. And again, her husband remained a loving man, and he never allowed anyone to hurt her. So she was protected, by her husband. And as time passed, the Islamic front grew more disciplined. And at last, time came to put an end to the conflict between the Muslims and the unbelievers. That was the Battle of Badr. The unbelievers were sure that they would win this battle. And they left Mecca large in numbers. And amongst the men who had to fight was Zainab's husband. Zainab's husband was pressured by his father and the other leaders of the Quraysh to also go to Medina to fight against the Muslims. Zainab was sad because she said no matter how the war went, she was going to lose either her father or she would lose her beloved husband. There was no win-win situation for her. It was a lose-lose situation. So she remained back in Mecca while her husband was forced, really, because he didn't want to do the battle, but he was pressured, to also go out to Medina with the army to fight. The messengers of the Quraysh returned back to Mecca with the news of the expected victory. But they were shocked to find out that there was no victory. The Battle of Badr, as everyone knows, the Muslims were the ones that were victorious. And the Muslims had taken many prisoners of war. Okay? Zainab was happy to learn that the Muslims were victorious. She was happy to learn that her father and his army of believers were okay. But what she was not happy about was that her husband was taken as a prisoner of war. Okay, he wasn't killed during this battle, but he was taken as a prisoner of war. And this is when Allah sent down the verses telling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam the rules of warfare. And the rules of warfare for us Muslims is not to kill our hostages, is not to kill our prisoners of war, but instead to ransom them. Okay? To ransom them. So when Zainab radiallahu anha found out that her husband was taken as a prisoner and he was being held by her father, she felt a little better because she knew that her father was a kind man. And she knew that her father would never bring any harm to her husband. When the word came that all the prisoners were to be ransomed, the family of her husband were prepared to ransom him, but Zainab said, "No, I insist. Let me pay the ransom." And she took off the necklace that she wore around her neck. And this is more dalil, guys, that women can wear jewelry. The Prophet's daughters and wives wore jewelry and they wore makeup too. They wore kohol. Kohol is makeup. Okay? Zainab took off the necklace that she wore around her neck and gave it to her brother-in-law. This was a necklace that her mother had given to her as a wedding present. And she asked her brother-in-law to give it to her father as ransom to set her husband free. Her brother-in-law took the necklace, and when he went to ransom her husband, he put the necklace in her father's hand. And he said, "Zainab, your daughter sent me with this necklace to ransom my brother Abul As ibn Rabi." And when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam opened up the package that she had placed the necklace in, and when he saw it, he knew, he remembered it was the necklace of his beloved wife Khadijah. And it reminded him of that of his daughter whom he missed so much, who is so much like him, but also so much like her mother Khadijah. And his heart became soft. And he said to the people around him, this necklace belonged to Khadijah. She gave it to Zainab, my daughter. And now Zainab wants to give it to me to ransom her husband. He said, if you all will agree to set her husband free, I would like to send the necklace back to her. And of course, the companions agreed. They said, oh, Prophet, we'll do what you want us to do. And so her husband was set free. You know, he was ransomed. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked Abu As to come close, and he whispered in his ear. And after he whispered in his ear, Abu As nodded his head, and he took the necklace and left. The people were wondering, what did the Prophet whisper in his ear? But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never answered, never told the people what he said. Instead, he said, by Allah, we never questioned him as a son-in-law. So in other words, the Prophet, didn't tell the people what he whispered in his son-in-law's ears. But he said, I've never questioned him. I've never questioned him, his honor as a son-in-law. In other words, he said that he's always been a good son-in-law. So they let Abu As go, and the Prophet gave him back the necklace to give back to his daughter Zainab. Okay. So what happened? When Abu As reached Mecca, he headed straight for his house. And his heart was broken, because what the other people didn't know was when the Prophet released him and gave him the necklace, that's when Allah had sent down, and I want all you women to listen, that's when Allah sent down the verses of the Quran saying that a woman cannot be married to a non-Muslim man. So what the Prophet had whispered in the ear of Abu As was, do you promise me that when you go back to Medina, you will send my daughter to me because she believes in Allah? Do you give me your word? And that's why Abu As nodded and said yes. And that's why the Prophet said, I've never questioned him or his honor as a son-in-law. The Prophet knew he would keep his word. So when Abu As arrived back to Mecca, he went to his home. Zainab was so happy to see her husband alive and well. And she ran towards him, but he pushed her away. He didn't hug her. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he whispered in Abu As's ear, he also told him, you are not lawful for my daughter anymore. You cannot touch her anymore. In other words, the marriage is over because you choose the way of your father and she chooses the way of her father. You two are no longer lawful. You are no longer married. So don't touch her anymore and send her directly back to me. So when he went back to Mecca and Zainab was so happy, she ran towards him to give him a hug. He pushed her away. And she was like, what is this? And she looked at his face. She saw that he had a funny look on his face. So she said, what happened, cousin? What's wrong, cousin? Remember, he was her husband, but he was also her cousin. And I'm going to tell you something else too. Back in these days when the Arabs, and not just the Arabs, but other people would marry their cousin. But with the Arabs, if something was serious, they wouldn't refer to you as the husband or the wife. They would call you cousin, because blood is always thicker than water with them. The tribe, the family blood was so important to them. So when he pushed her away, she said, "What's wrong, my cousin?" This way he knew she was addressing him as family, cousin, not as husband. So that let him know she really needed to know and wanted to know why, what's wrong. But he couldn't bring himself to tell her that he had to send her away. He couldn't bring himself to tell her that their marriage was done. Okay? And then finally, after she continued, to be persistent, that's when he finally told her, "Your father had me make a promise to him. And that promise was that I will send you back to him because you are no longer legal for me and I am no longer legal for you." And he told her, Zayd ibn Haritha, who was the adopted son of the prophet, and this is before adoption was made illegal. He said, Zayd ibn Haritha will come from Medina to take you back to your father. So Zainab was hurt, but also she was God-fearing. She said, if this is the law, if this is what my Lord says, and if this is what my father commands, then so be it. So here we can see she was tested with this love. She loved her husband. But here it was again. Now the law has come down. Your Lord said you cannot be with a man who is not Muslim. And your father has ordered you to come immediately to Medina. So now what are you going to do? Do you love Allah? Do you love his messenger? Or do you love your husband more? Well, she passed the test. She said, if I have to leave my husband, I leave my husband. Okay, subhanallah. When you women today, so many of you women, you know it's haram to be living with these men, staying in the same home with them. I don't care if you got a bedroom and he got another room. It's haram. You should have left him. When you became Muslim, you should have packed your bags that same second and left and went home to your mother, your children, or somebody else to live. The YMCA, WCA, anywhere, but you cannot be living with him. But you women are still with these men. Where's your iman? Where's your faith? Where's your devotion to Allah? Where's your allegiance? And you wonder why Allah sent the war that he sent. Okay, so when the day came and Zayd arrived, and by the way, that he had no dealings, him and Zainab could not touch or be together anymore. When Zayd ibn Haritha arrived, Abul As asked his brother, whose name was Kinanah, to take Zainab to the place where Zayd would be waiting for her. And at this time, guys, Zainab had discovered that she was pregnant. She had discovered that she was pregnant when her husband had left to go fight the Battle of Badr. She was 4 months pregnant. Okay, so here this woman was, not only was she no longer able to be with her husband, but also she was pregnant with a child, with another child that she wouldn't be able to raise with him because he was not of Islam. Okay, so Abul As, he prepared a camel for her. He put a howdah on it for her for the journey. And this was in the daytime. And his brother Kinanah escorted Zainab out of Mecca. But as they were leaving Mecca, a group of people saw them. And they thought that this was something bad. They said, look at this. Here Muhammad's daughter is leaving in broad daylight to challenge us. So they went and got their weapons, and they went to chase after Kinanah, who was leading the camel that his sister-in-law was on. And they caught up with them, and they told Kinanah to take her back to Mecca, but he refused. And then one of the men tried to cower her with a spear. And to duck away from the spear, she ended up falling off the camel. And when she fell off the camel, she began to bleed and she miscarried. She lost her baby. So she was 4 months pregnant and miscarried. And by the way, guys, just for the record, this is when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam talked about the child, the fetus. You know, if a woman has a miscarriage, and if the child is formed, about whether or not you give a funeral for it. If the woman miscarries and you can see the child is a fetus with limbs, then you do the funeral. But if it's nothing, then you don't. Well, she was 4 months pregnant and she miscarried. In fact, she bled real heavily and she was in a lot of pain. Now, it just so happened that even though she was knocked off the camel, the men came and wanted to, fight them. But Kinanah took out his arrows and told the men, if you come near us, I'm going to shoot you with these arrows. And it just so happened that Abu Sufiyan was also one of those men in that group. And he stepped in and he said, put your arrows away. He said, let's talk to him. And Abu Sufiyan, who was one of the leaders of the Quraysh, he approached Kinanah and he said, I don't have a problem. We don't have a problem with you taking her to Muhammad, but you're doing it in broad daylight. This is disrespecting us. By you taking her in broad daylight, it's showing that Muhammad's got power, that Muhammad's got control, and he just won this battle of Badr. He said the people are going to think that we're weak. He said you can take her to her father, but take her at nighttime. He said, so go back to Mecca with her until the people calm down. And then sneak her out and during the nighttime and take her to Medina. And Kinanah, he could see that Zainab was bleeding heavily and she was in pain. So he felt that it would be best to take her back to Mecca. So they went back to Mecca and she was nursed by the women of her family. And the men who hurt her, they were bragging and boasting about what they did. They went to the marketplace and went to the Kaaba, boasting and bragging about how they knocked Muhammad's daughter off her camel and made her miscarry. But it just so happened as they were bragging and boasting, Hind, she saw what they did and what they were saying. She was the wife of Abu Sufiyan. She said, look at you men. In war, you're like a woman. You run away and fight like a woman. But when you're not in war, you go around beating up on women, knocking women off their camels, making them have miscarriages. So, Hind humiliated the men. They were boasting and bragging about what they did to Zainab. Hind being another woman, she was like, you want to boast and brag about knocking a woman down, making her miscarry? But when you was on the battlefield, you was a wimp. You let them beat your behind like you were a woman. So that made the men stop bragging and boasting. Okay. So Zainab, she stayed in Mecca just long enough to get over, her miscarriage. And then after her, she healed from her miscarriage, they did what Abu Sufiyan said. They snuck out of Mecca and went to Medina during the night. And this was a long journey for her. And she was very sad, not just because she lost her baby, but also because, subhanAllah, she was losing her husband. She had lost the man of her life, the love of her life. Okay. And so she ended up going to Medina, and that's when Allah has sent down the laws about women not being able to marry non-Muslim men. And Zainab went to the home of her father. She lived with Sauda. She moved in with Sauda. Remember, Sauda took care of all the kids anyway. And she stayed with Sauda, and she was happy to be with her father and be with the Muslims, but she still longed for her husband. She was hoping and praying that her husband would end up, missing her, and that he would in turn convert to Islam, because other people were converting to Islam. Islam was spreading amongst the Quraysh. But unfortunately, she waited and waited, and it seemed like her husband never came. Okay. Then one day in the month of October, Abul al-As was returning from Syria with a caravan of merchandise, and he was attacked by Muslim raiders. He escaped, but the raiders took all his merchandise. And much of the merchandise belonged to the people of Mecca. Abul As, he had no choice but to sneak into Medina at night. And when he arrived in Medina, he asked the people, where can I find the lady Zainab? And the people guided him to the home of Zainab. And he went to her and he asked her, he said, oh, wife, give me protection. Zainab was happy to see her husband. But she was unhappy because she thought he was coming to convert to Islam. She said, welcome. She said, what guided you? Have you finally been guided to the light? He said, no. He said, I did not come as a Muslim. He said, I've come as a fugitive from the Muslims who are chasing after me, and I am seeking refuge with you from them. They stole all my merchandise. So Zainab had mixed feelings. She had pain and frustration because she really thought he had come to convert to Islam. But also she didn't want any harm to come to him because she still loved him. So she said, welcome. She said, whoever seeks refuge with the prophet will never be disappointed. So she let him in. And then that morning, the Fajr prayer was called. The Adhan for Fajr was called. Zainab, she prepared herself to do something that no woman had ever done before. As the prophet was preparing to lead the people in the Fajr prayer, she went out and she said, I, Zainab, offer refuge to Abul al-As ibn Rabi. She yelled it out. Now, for the Arabs, guys, they were a warrior race of people. And they were always fighting against other tribes. But if a tribe, any person of a tribe could offer refuge to a person from another tribe, and they would be protected. But this was always done by men. Never a woman. Again, they want us to think that women are invisible. We can't be heard. We can't be seen. When a woman walks out the house, what do they say? We're supposed to be as if we don't exist, like we're ghosts. Well, she ran out the house and announced at the top of her lungs, I give refuge to Abul al-As. He's under my protection. And she was a woman. And when she said that, the prophet said, oh people, do you hear what I hear? And they said, yes. And then the prophet said, by he in whose hand is my soul. I did not know about this until I heard the same thing you heard. He said, the Muslims are one hand against their enemies. And we will offer refuge to whomever she has offered. In other words, the prophet said, we are one nation. Men are not over us like that. Women and men are equal spiritually. The same way a man can offer his protection to another person, this woman can do it too. And we have to honor it. We have to respect it. So where does this philosophy come today that these brothers have, where they tell us women that we have to be invisible as if we don't exist, that we don't have a voice? They're crazy. They're crazy. So after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam finished leading the people in prayer, he went to his daughter. And she hurried over to her father. And she said, oh, father, Abul As is my cousin. And he's also the father of my sons. And I have given him protection. The prophet then smiled at her. And he said, oh, daughter, we offer protection to whoever you offer it to. Be kind to him, but don't let him touch you, because it is not legal. So here the prophet let her know it's okay. The father of your children, your cousin, is safe, but don't let him touch you. You cannot have a relationship with him because he is not Muslim. And you cannot be with him sexually or any type of intimate way. Okay. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam then walked away, and she followed him and asked him to let Abul As receive back the items that the Muslims took from him. And the Prophet promised he would do so. So she went back to Abul As and she told him, my father promised that they will return back to you what they took from you. And this impressed Abul As. This is how Islam spread. Islam didn't spread through the sword. It spread through the rights that Allah gave to us. It spread through the way we treat others, our behavior towards others. Abul As witnessed something that was never ever done in the history of the Arabic people. A woman was allowed to offer protection to someone. The only people that allowed a woman to do that, guys, were Romans. The Roman women were the only women in history at that time that were able to offer protection to a person. No other people allowed women to do that. But here, her husband saw that this new way of life gave women the right to do something that only a man could do, and also the way they treated their hostages. You know, the Arabs were kind of barbaric, guys. They used to kill their prisoners of war and stuff. But here they were treated with dignity. They were treated with respect. and kindness and fed and all of that. So Abul As was sitting there watching all of this. And so he got up and he went to see the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet was sitting with his companions around him. And he could see how all these men, paid obedience to him, and how they had love for him, and how they had loyalty towards him. And he noticed how whenever the Prophet Muhammad spoke, everybody listened with respect. When the Prophet noticed Abul As, he pointed to him and said, "That man is one of us, and you have taken his money. If you will give him back his money, I'd appreciate it. But if you don't want to give it to him, it's your right, because it's the spoils of war that Allah allows you." The Prophet said, "But I would like it if y'all would give him back his money." And that's when the companions said, "We'll give him back his money." And they then said, "Is there anything else that you want back, Abul As?" And he said, "No, may Allah reward you the best." And so Abul As, he took his possessions back and he set off for Mecca. He went back to Mecca with his money and his goods. And as the Prophet Muhammad watched him walk away, he said, "He's a good man because he kept his word to me. He brought my daughter back to me, and he never touched her again." So Abul As went back to Mecca, but when he reached Mecca, he called the people of the Quraysh to come and collect their share of the prophets. And they all came and took their share. And then after everybody had their share, he said, "I want everyone here to know." He said, "I testify that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his servant and messenger. By Allah, what kept me from declaring my coming to Islam was that I was afraid that you would think I wanted to take your money. But now that I've given all of you your money, I declare my commitment to Islam." And the Quraysh were shocked. After he made that announcement, he quickly got back on his camel and he went back to Medina. And when he arrived in Medina, he stood before the Prophet and he again said, "I testify that there is no God but Allah, and that you are his messenger and servant." And then all the Muslims congratulated him. And Zainab was most happy of all. She ran out the house and she looked at her father and he said, "Yes, you can touch him. You are now back married." Now we have some hadiths guys that say that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed her and him to be together, and they didn't have to do a new marriage contract. But then there's other hadiths that say he did, But anyway, they were back married together as husband and wife, and they were able to be together finally after all these years of struggle and trial. But again, guys, it seems like this world is nothing but a test for the believer. Remember, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said everything in this world is temporary. For us believers, we will never experience happiness, not in this world. This world is meant to be the paradise for the unbelievers, not for us. We'll just have temporary moments of happiness. And that's what happened with Zainab. Her and her husband were finally together, but they were only together for a year because a year after this is when Zainab became sick and she died. So they were only allowed to enjoy being husband and wife in Islam for just a year. And when she died, her husband was very, very sad. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood by him and tried to support him through his grief. And it was when Zainab died that the rules of burial and shrouding came for us. Remember, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told the women to wash her 3 or 5 times with water and lotus, and then to add camphor to the final wash, and to begin with the right side, and then the areas of ablution. And then they braided her hair into the 3 braids. So it was her death that the rules of washing and shrouding a woman came about. And after she was washed, they wrapped her. He gave them a piece of his clothing and said, wrap her in it. And she was wrapped in the Prophet's garment, and he buried her. Zainab's daughter Umayma remained as the sweet memory of her mother. She was one of the loveliest members of the Prophet's family, and she was dear to his heart because she's the only child of Zainab that lived. And Aisha radiallahu anha tells us that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once given a necklace as a present, and he gave it to Umayma. He said, because she's the dearest one in my family. Okay. A lot of you may ask, well, what happened to her husband? Well, as a widower, Abu al-As returned back to Mecca. So after they buried Zainab, Abu al-As went back to Mecca, and he married another woman named Faqita bint Sa'id ibn al-As ibn Abi Umayyah, and they had a daughter named Maryam. He never participated in any of the Islamic wars. So that means after the death of the Prophet, he didn't participate in any of the battles, the Rita wars with Abu Bakr and them. He didn't participate. He died in Mecca in the year 662. So that's what happened to him. I mean, he was a broken man. I mean, that she was the love of his life. And we have no records of him participating in any of the Ridda Wars or anything that came after that, or any of the other wars fought under any of the caliphs. He just retired with that one wife and that child he had by her into Mecca. And that's it. All right. So again, this is a story, the story of Zainab, you know, the story of patience, of sacrifice, of love. And it shows that everything is short-lived in this life. If you're a woman looking for a happily ever after, there's no such thing as a happily ever after. You know, we'll have moments of contentment, moments of pleasure, but life is going to be filled with struggles. In marriages, there's going to be ups and downs, good times and bad times, good times and bad times. Oftentimes, you're going to have more bad times than good, because that's what these female companions experience. Many of these companions whose stories I'm going to be doing, you're going to see that they experience many bad times. Some of these female companions whose stories I'm going to go over with you now, for this series, are like Zainab. They may have had 1 or 2 years of happiness, and then the man died. Or 1 or 2 years of happiness, and then their heart was broken. It's a roller coaster. Life for the believer is a roller coaster. It's not a Ferris wheel. It's only a Ferris wheel, you know, around and around and around for the unbeliever here. So I'm going to stop right here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik.